Hey there, this is James. I can still remember the way the email notification flashed on Rebecca's phone that day, the moment she got the promotion to senior marketing manager. The small buzz in the air, the sort of thing that makes you want to sit up straighter, like you're finally standing in the light. The salary increase, the new title, it felt like we'd both crossed a threshold. But as she celebrated with a glass of wine and a giddy laugh, something shifted between us, subtle but undeniable. I had been working construction for almost 15 years, long hours under the sun, rough hands, calloused skin. Rebecca had always supported me, told me how much she admired my hard work. The roles were clear. She worked her office job, I kept us going with my hands. We weren't rich, but we managed. And then, with that promotion, everything changed. Rebecca started earning more than me. A lot more. She joked about it at first, how it might be time for me to start cooking dinner while she pulled in the big bucks. But that smile didn't reach her eyes. It lingered on the edges of our conversations, never quite settling. I didn't mind, not at first. Maybe I even felt a little proud of her, watching her climb that corporate ladder while I spent my days wrestling with drywall and steel. But over time, it wore at me. She didn't know it, but the cracks had already started forming. James, you're home late again. James, you missed dinner. James, you promised you'd help with the kids tonight. Her tone grew sharper, cutting through the hum of the house. The kids, 4 of them, were becoming a blur of noise, chaos, and schedules. I was already stretched thin. I couldn't see how to fix it. Rebecca's evenings were filled with meetings, late dinners with colleagues, and brainstorming sessions over cocktails, all while I stood at the kitchen sink, washing dishes after another dinner without her. The kids were asleep by the time I got home, their faces a blur of innocence and expectation. They needed me, needed us, but the house felt emptier with each passing week. Still, I tried to keep up. I tried to be there for the kids, balancing everything, work, the house, the kids, but it wasn't enough. It never felt like enough. And the more I tried, the further Rebecca seemed to pull away. I couldn't help but notice her eyes darting to her phone when we were together, her fingers flying over the screen while I talked. I couldn't keep up. My hours were more unpredictable now, my workdays dragging on, and I missed bedtime routines I used to cherish. Rebecca? She wasn't waiting up for me anymore. That tension, it wasn't visible, not unless you were looking for it. But it was there. Every look, every word, every unspoken resentment. And with it came the nagging feeling that something was missing. Something had changed. I still couldn't pinpoint when it happened. Was it when she first came home late from a meeting, exhausted but glowing from the buzz of a new project she was running? Or when she started complaining about the kids' behavior more often, like it was my fault I was too tired to help? It was a little thing, really, but it weighed on me like a stone in my chest. Every dinner I missed, every kids' game I couldn't make it to, every quiet moment alone when I sat in the dark wondering what had happened to us, it all started to pile up. And Rebecca? She couldn't see it. Or maybe she didn't want to. Maybe she was too busy holding up her corner of the world to notice that I wasn't holding mine together like I used to. We were supposed to be partners. Equals. But the more successful Rebecca became, the more she pulled ahead. And me? I stayed behind, trying to keep up, trying to be the man I used to be. Only, I wasn't sure who that man was anymore. I don't remember exactly when it started, but I know when I first noticed it. It was small, subtle, like a crack you can't quite see until it's too wide to ignore. Rebecca was never one to shy away from speaking her mind, but it wasn't always about the big things. This time, it was the little things. The dishes in the sink. The crumbs on the counter. The way she'd look at me, disappointment, frustration, all masked with a forced smile. James, how many times do I have to tell you? The dishes are piling up again. Her voice was sharp, almost cutting. I could hear the edge in it, the same tone she used when she was trying to hide how much she was annoyed. I didn't respond right away. I just walked over to the sink and started washing the plates. I hadn't had time earlier. It wasn't a big deal. But it was. Everything was piling up, everything I couldn't fix, no matter how hard I tried. There was no way to win anymore. She didn't just want a clean house or dinner on the table. She wanted something more. Something I wasn't giving her, and she wasn't willing to say what it was. James, you missed Mia's parent-teacher conference again. You promised you'd go. Her voice was sharper now, accusing. I looked up, meeting her eyes for a second, before my gaze dropped to the floor. She was right. I had promised. But it wasn't just that. It was the endless list of promises I couldn't keep. The kids, the house, work, her. I couldn't do it all. And no matter what I did, she was always disappointed. I could see it in the way she looked at me, like I was the problem, the one who couldn't handle things. But the thing was, I was trying. I was working, busting my ass to make sure everything stayed afloat, and still, it wasn't enough. The silence between us grew. It wasn't the comfortable quiet it used to be. It was a suffocating kind of silence. I would ask if something was wrong, and she would say nothing. Or worse, she'd tell me it was fine, but I could feel it in the air, the tension, the walls she was building. She'd get home late from work, the kids already asleep, and I'd be left sitting in the dark, staring at the empty space where we used to talk, used to laugh. She didn't even notice when I was home anymore. Her eyes were always glued to her phone, her work, her world that didn't include me. I tried to fill the gap. I'd call the kids in, spend more time with them, help out with homework, try to keep up. But with every attempt, the space between Rebecca and me only grew. And then, there were the little jabs. The criticism that wasn't just about the house or the kids. You don't know how to manage this place. You're always behind. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. I wasn't enough. I didn't know how to fix it. She wasn't asking for help. She wasn't asking for change. She was just pointing out everything I was doing wrong. One night, after another argument, I walked in on her sitting at the kitchen table, her phone in her hand. She barely looked up. The air between us felt thick, like it was vibrating with something unsaid. I knew she was hiding something, but I didn't want to believe it. I glanced at her phone. Her messages were open, back and forth with a colleague. The tone was casual, but there was something there I couldn't ignore. She'd been talking to him more than I had thought, and the familiarity between them, it hurt. I didn't want to confront her, but I knew I couldn't just let it go. But I didn't say anything. Instead, I went back to the couch, sitting in the silence that had become our home. I felt the distance between us like a weight I couldn't shake off. Rebecca wasn't the same anymore. Maybe she had never been. She wasn't the woman I married. I couldn't tell where she ended and where the stranger began. I could feel it now, more than ever. She was pulling away, and no matter how hard I tried to hold on, I couldn't stop her from slipping away. I wish I could say I was surprised when I found out. I wish I could say I had no idea what was coming. But deep down, I already knew. The messages on her phone, the late nights, the way she'd become a ghost in our house, it all pointed to something I couldn't ignore any longer. The truth hit me like a punch to the gut. Rebecca wasn't just distant, she was somewhere else. With him. I confronted her. There was no denying it. She didn't even try. She looked at me with cold eyes, a strange calmness in her voice. "It's over, James," she said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I've been seeing him for months." The words didn't hit me all at once, not like they should have. Instead, it was like everything went still, the world holding its breath for a moment. My mind raced. I wanted to yell, to demand answers, but my voice wouldn't come. I was numb. She didn't look sorry. She didn't even seem remorseful. She seemed relieved. "You weren't there," she said, shrugging. "I needed someone. You weren't enough." I didn't know what to say to that. What could I say? I had been there. I had tried. I had been trying for months, for years, and it wasn't enough. The silence between us grew thicker, suffocating. I wanted to ask about him, about the affair, but the words caught in my throat. It didn't matter anymore. She had already made her choice. What hurt the most was how little she seemed to care. It wasn't even about me anymore. It was about her, about what she wanted, and she had no intention of looking back. The next few weeks were a blur. I don't remember the details of what happened between the discovery and the divorce papers, but I remember the feeling. The feeling of being completely stripped of everything I thought I knew about our life, about us. Rebecca was quick with the divorce proceedings. Almost too quick. Like she had been planning it for months, maybe years, and I was the last to know. There was no fight. No begging. She wanted out, and I was just a casualty of her escape. She played her cards perfectly. I didn't want the house, didn't want the car, didn't want any of it. I only wanted one thing, to fix us. But she wasn't interested. Her mind was made up. She was done with me, done with the family. And that's when I saw the cruelty in her actions. The way she made it about me, about how I was the one who failed. She spun this narrative, online and with anyone who'd listen, that I was the one who couldn't keep it together. She painted herself as the victim, and I was just some broken man who couldn't keep his family together. I don't know if I was angry or just devastated. Maybe both. But in her mind, she had already won. She had moved on, and I was left to pick up the pieces. When the papers were signed, when it was official, something shifted inside me. I thought I'd feel relief. Maybe even freedom. But all I felt was emptiness. It wasn't a victory. It wasn't closure. It was just an end. The first few days after the divorce were quiet. Too quiet. The kids didn't know what to make of it. They were confused, hurt. They didn't understand why their mom wasn't around like she used to be. They didn't understand why I wasn't the one who was leaving. Rebecca was gone most of the time, busy with her new life. She didn't reach out. She didn't call. She didn't care. And then there were the kids. They started to pull away from her. Mia, the oldest, had found out about the affair before the rest of us. She was angry. She wouldn't speak to Rebecca for days. I couldn't blame her. How could I explain it? How could I make sense of something that didn't make sense to me? I don't know how to describe the way it felt. Watching my kids shift their loyalty, watching them choose me. It should have been a relief, but it only made it worse. It was a reminder of how far Rebecca had fallen. How much she had destroyed. I tried to hold it together, to be the rock for them. But the truth is, I was crumbling. I couldn't fix this. I couldn't make it better. I was just a father, trying to do my best, but my best wasn't good enough. And Rebecca? She seemed fine. In fact, she seemed liberated. Like she was enjoying the freedom I had hoped she'd never get. There were days when I'd stare at the phone, waiting for her to reach out, to apologize. But she never did. Not once. Instead, she posted her new beginning on social media, looking happier than I'd ever seen her. And I hated it. I hated that she had moved on so easily, while I was left holding on to the wreckage of a life I had no control over anymore. But the worst part? I couldn't stop wondering if I had ever really mattered to her. Or if I had been nothing more than a safety net, someone to catch her when things didn't work out. The weeks after the divorce felt like a slow, unbearable drag. Every morning was the same, a loop I couldn't escape. I'd wake up early, make the kids breakfast, get them off to school, and go through the motions. But there was no joy in it, no sense of fulfillment. It felt like I was just ticking off tasks on an endless list, all of them meaningless. Rebecca's absence was like an open wound I couldn't avoid. She wasn't physically there, but everything about her was. The house felt hollow without her. The silence in the mornings was suffocating, and the children, while happy to be with me, still carried that confusion, their loyalty torn between two worlds. I watched them struggle. Mia, especially. She'd always been the one who kept her emotions closest to her chest, but now, it was all out there, her anger, her sadness, her betrayal. I couldn't fix it. I couldn't make it go away. "Why isn't Mom coming today?" Mia asked one night as I tucked her into bed. I didn't have an answer. What could I say? How could I explain something so painful, so unjust? "She's busy, sweetheart," was the best I could manage. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. Rebecca wasn't busy with work or other obligations, she was busy with him. And I knew it. But it was a truth I wasn't ready to speak aloud. Not to her, and not to my kids. I tried dating a few times. It was awkward, at best. I didn't feel ready, but I thought it might help fill the void. But it didn't. I wasn't the same man anymore. I couldn't pretend. There was no spark. No connection. The intimacy, the closeness, had been ripped out of me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't enough. Not for Rebecca, not for anyone. And maybe that was the problem. Maybe I had never been enough for her, and now, I wasn't enough for myself. I started to spend more time at work. It wasn't a solution, but it was something to do, a distraction. The work was endless reports, meetings, deadlines. At least there, I didn't have to think about my life falling apart. But even at work, I couldn't escape the reality of it. My mind wandered. I'd catch myself staring out the window, lost in thought, wondering how the hell I got here. How did I end up as the person who lost everything? And then there were the messages. Rebecca, always trying to appear like she was winning. I hated seeing her posts, her photos with him, her smiling face and places we used to go, doing things we had once done. She had a new life now. And I was left behind. She didn't reach out to the kids unless it was to send them gifts or bribe them with promises she didn't intend to keep. She thought that would fix things. She thought that would make them happy. But they weren't. They weren't fooled. One night, I found Mia sitting on the couch, staring at her phone with a look of utter despair. "Everything's fine," she said, her voice hollow. "Mom says she loves us. She says we'll be okay." I didn't know how to respond. There was no easy answer, no comforting words. What could I say when I was just as lost as she was? In the silence, I realized how much Rebecca had underestimated the kids. They weren't going to be bought. They weren't going to forget. And for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this wasn't just about me. Maybe this wasn't just my burden to carry. But the spiral didn't stop. Each day, it dragged me further down. I was stuck in this place, this limbo, where nothing felt right. Where no matter what I did, it wasn't enough to bring back what we had. I couldn't rebuild a family that had already crumbled. The guilt ate at me. The regret. The endless what-ifs. What if I had tried harder? What if I had been more patient? What if I had seen the signs? What if I had been a better husband, a better father? I could drown in it, but I didn't know how to stop. So I kept going. I kept waking up, kept pretending, kept trying to make it work for the kids. But I knew the truth. I was spiraling. And no matter how much I tried to hold on, I didn't know how to stop myself from falling. It wasn't until the therapy sessions started that I began to understand what had happened. I thought I was going in to fix myself, to get over the pain, but it was more than that. The truth hit harder than anything I had faced. Rebecca's absence didn't just leave a hole in our lives, it had shattered everything. My identity, my confidence, everything I thought I was, had been torn apart by her actions. And the hardest part was realizing how much of it had been part of a pattern. Her cruelty wasn't an accident. The manipulation, the emotional games, it was all deliberate. She had been chipping away at me for years, and I never saw it coming. Sitting in that room, with the therapist's questions hanging in the air, I had to confront a truth I wasn't ready for. I had been abused, emotionally manipulated. I had been used, and I hadn't even known it. "Why didn't you leave sooner?" the therapist asked me one afternoon, her tone gentle but firm. "I didn't think I could," I replied, my voice sounding foreign to me. I thought it was just how relationships were supposed to be. That I had to fix it. That I had to keep trying. But I hadn't fixed anything. I had been drowning, and I couldn't see it. The whole time, I had been ignoring my own needs, my own well-being, all for the sake of keeping the family together. But that wasn't enough. It wasn't ever going to be enough. Rebecca didn't change. She didn't seek help. She didn't try to mend what she had broken. She moved on quickly, a picture-perfect new life with him, while I was left to pick up the pieces. But the truth was, I didn't need her to fix it. I needed to fix myself. I needed to let go of the guilt, the shame, the never-ending what-ifs. I began to focus on the kids, on rebuilding trust with them. I wasn't perfect. I still had bad days, still felt the weight of everything. But I was there for them, in ways Rebecca never was. We started small, family dinners, movie nights, simple things, but those moments became everything. The kids needed me, and for the first time in months, I realized I needed them too. It was a slow process. Some days, I felt like I was back at square one, but other days, I saw the spark in Mia's eyes again. I saw them all starting to heal, even if it was just a little. And for the first time in a long while, I started to believe it was possible to move on. I had to accept the truth about Rebecca, that she was never coming back, never going to apologize, never going to be the person I thought she was. But in that acceptance, I found a strange peace. I couldn't change her. I couldn't control what she did, or how she affected us. But I could choose to move forward. And so, I did. With every step I took, I felt the weight lifting, little by little. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I wasn't trapped anymore. The final step, though, was the hardest, forgiving myself. It wasn't instant, and it wasn't clean, but as the months passed, I realized I had been doing the best I could. I wasn't perfect, and I would never be. But I could be better. I could rebuild. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.